Hi, everyone. I'm Doc. I'm a clinical psychotherapist.
And I'm Cece. I'm a professional musician.
We're two friends who spend a lot of time unpacking each other's bullshit.
And this podcast is a way for us to help you through yours.
Welcome to Let's Unpack This.
For this episode, we are going to be reading a listener's question.
Yes. And so we're
Yes!
Yes! We're looking really forward to hearing from you about specific situations and questions that you may have that you'd like us to unpack. Feel free to send us an email to letsunpackthispodcast@gmail.com, and we'll be keeping identities anonymous on the show, so don't worry, to protect you, the writers, and your loved ones.
Yep. Okay. First question. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Ready.
Dear Let's Unpack This. Loved your first episode and looking forward to hearing the rest. I guess I just had some simple questions that I was hoping you could answer in a few statements. To start, who am I? And also, am I okay? Nothing? Yeah, me neither. I think my whole life I have had a tendency to put others' needs ahead of mine. No, not in the Mother Teresa altruistic way, but rather in the please don't abandon me or hate me, and also I hate confrontation way. This ultimately led to a stunted development of who I am, and to this day I struggle with finding that for myself. One area I've tried to improve this is in my decision making. This goes from little things like what I want for dinner, to what career I want to pursue, and even to understanding and deciding how I think and react to situations and people. Depending on others to validate me or comfort me was really a way I sought stability and made me feel like I had some semblance of control no matter how illusory it was. I am in a 12-step program and I'm constantly told to practice selflessness to get out of self and to help the next person, and often I struggle with navigating this and with my codependent tendencies. So I guess my question is, how can I find myself after years of being codependent, and how do I know if I'm doing it right and not just creating more maladaptive patterns?
Thank you so much for writing in.
Wow, that was great.
That was great.
Yeah. This is a great topic.
Is it?
Yeah, we're not feeling good about having this conversation, are we?
No.
It's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
It brings up a lot of stuff, but it's great. This is something I think that a lot of people will be able to identify. I know I identify fully with that question.
Mm-hmm. How so?
Well, so I recently realized that I didn't know what codependency was for a long time. And I think I definitely didn't know what it was before I got sober. That was not
right.
It's
all you knew.
It was just who I am. I don't even think I realized what the word. I don't even think I ever heard the word before then. But yeah, trying to find a balance between being there for others and being codependent is really difficult for me.
Mm-hmm.
How about you?
Absolutely. As a recovering codependent myself, I have been either in full-blown codependency in my past or have gone to the other extreme of complete independence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, really easy to fall back into these patterns, especially that our writer's talking about, because that's all that we knew. Growing up, that's all that we knew. That's what we learned, whether it was we learned these patterns of behavior to survive. If we didn't get that validation or that attention from a parent, we did these things to try and receive attention or validation.
Right.
Or we learned to be this way from our parent or parents. And so I want to say to the writer, you weren't born this way. This is what you did to survive. Mm-hmm. It's all that you knew. When we don't get certain needs met as kids, just because our parents were doing the best that they could with the knowledge and experience that they had, we seek that out in our relationships, not only when we're younger, but especially in adulthood. And we will usually seek out partners unknowingly, even in friends, any type of relationship that resemble our parents, because we're trying to recreate those relationships because that's all that we know.
Right. Yeah, I feel like I can still struggle with navigating codependency with friendship more than my parental relationships or with my significant other, because it's kind of more of a blurred thing when you're dealing with friends.
Absolutely.
And all different types of personalities.
Mm-hmm.
So wait, for people, like, can you just kind of describe from, like, your knowledge, like, what, like, the basis of like, what does that word mean for people who might not know?
Yeah. So codependency, it's really truly an emotional addiction.
Mm.
So you're seeking out in somebody else the feeling of safety and security. So, for me, for instance, like having a parent who was not providing me attention when I was younger, right? Like that feels, quote, safe and secure to me. So I will seek out people, partners, friendships where they also do not give me attention, because if I then can seek that out, that's what gives me that emotional hit. So we will constantly seek out the approval and validation of others, and then once we get that little semblance of that, we stay safe in our little comfort zone, in our little sense of security. So we'll betray ourselves constantly, right? People please. Our writer talked about being indecisive, doing for others what, we don't want to be doing. So having lack of boundaries and trying to make up for all of that we didn't get when we were younger. But instead, we just keep recreating the same relationships over and over and over again. Like toxicity feels normal to us. And so that emotional addiction piece, and I don't know if anybody can relate to this. I don't know if you can relate to this. Like you literally will feel that emotional hit in your stomach, which, by the way, is not love, is not intuition. It is your ego. And when it's in your stomach, you'll get that emotional hit. Like when you get that Snapchat or, that text message or that look from somebody or whatever they may say, I'm proud of you, right? And you get that hit and that feeds you and puts you back into that sense of security.
Normal. Yeah.
And then you'll just keep going. But you're
so how do you like how do you tell what is being codependent and what is actual? Because we do need connection and security. That's what we're told, at least. You know what I mean? Like that, connection and security is like a normal thing, but like how, like my problem is always like, where's the line?
So what I usually go through with people is if you are in any way betraying yourself, that is not authentic love. That is codependency. When you are muting your own needs, your own desires, your own wants for the happiness or, for someone else or the security with somebody else. And so I always look to that. Like, how are you maybe betraying yourself? And I know that, and we'll get into, with the writer's question of, well, I don't even know myself. So how do I know if I'm betraying myself? And we'll talk about that. But you want to look at that. Like, in any way, am I putting myself on the back burner in order to try and meet, this
their
other
needs,
person's needs, or to make them happy, or to give them what they want so that maybe I get what I want? In no way is that authentic love, though.
And a lot of times, like, a lot of these things are, like, learned.
Absolutely learned. All of the things that you're talking about, avoiding confrontation, not being able to make decisions, doing for others, that you might not want to do, is people pleasing. It's all stuff that you learned growing up in order to, quote, survive and, like, stay in your comfort zone of safety and security. So that's why when there is a period of maybe peace, or you're alone, or, nothing's really going on, we will self-sabotage to create chaos, because that is genuinely our comfort. Yeah, we're fucked up.
It's so relatable.
And that indecisiveness is a lack of trust in self, because we don't know ourselves. And so we don't know if we're going to be okay with the decision that we're making. If I make this decision, will I be okay with it later? Will I be able to handle the emotion that might come up later? Will the other person be okay with the decision that I'm
making?
Yeah,
how are they going to react? That's
because,
always, my fear. It's like, oh, well, like, it's the action isn't the scary part. Like, it's like seeing how somebody else reacts to it or responds to it that, like, I'm always afraid of.
Which is why we people please, which is why we betray ourselves. But people talk about confrontation as such a negative thing, as such a scary thing. Confrontation is just an opportunity to communicate. It's just an opportunity to connect more. It does not have to be a bad thing. And we will avoid openly talking with others about our feelings or our needs or our wants, because we're afraid of, yes, how might they react? Will they leave me?
Yeah.
we never want to be left. Right? We were left when we were younger, or, we were smothered when we were younger, whichever one. And so there's like no in between. And I don't even mean that your parent had to have left you totally. Mm-hmm. Like, it could have just been that maybe
emotional.
They weren't. Yes.
Yeah, they weren't present.
Mm-hmm. And again, our parents were doing the best that they could with the knowledge and experience they had at that time, but.
And I feel like I might be wrong, but there's like levels to this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to spot, and it's such a personal thing in a personal relationship. So like for me to look at different relationships in my life, it's so specific. Like it's been hard I've had to take a look at like, oh my God, I am codependent.
Yeah.
Or this person is acting in a way that, is codependent. Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
This is why our relationship isn't working.
Right. Of course, it's going to be a lot easier to have a interdependent relationship, a give and take, mutual respecting relationship when the other person is also not codependent. Like, but being able to provide the space for, like, in our friendship, like the space for you to feel safe and secure with me, to be open with me and whatever that is.
And honest.
Yes, and honest. Like, not feel like you ever have to mute yourself or say no or
That's
say
so
yes.
Important.
Mm-hmm. Even though the work always, of course, starts and ends with ourselves. Mm-hmm. You also have to think about the person that you're with. Mm-hmm. Are they also working on themselves and not enacting in codependent patterns with me?
And if they are, what do you do?
Mm-hmm. I always, when I think of codependency and why it's so uncomfortable for me to talk about, is a past relationship I had when I was younger. And, he was a recovering drug addict and he was relapsing for the majority of our first year together. And I stayed with him and I thought it was out of love. And until years later, after I had done all this work on it, I realized that was not love. Like, there was no love present with somebody who was not present. All I was doing was what I thought was trying to keep him alive, but one, that's not my role. So I was constantly betraying myself out of 100% fear alone. Like fear of being alone if this person didn't make it or didn't change. Because if he did change, then that would mean that I was good enough for him to change for. No, it's never that. No. Like, his drug addiction had nothing to do with me, and I am, in fact, not God.
Right.
I don't get to change other people. I don't get to decide for them what their journey is or what that looks like. But I thought, all this effort I'm putting in and, me staying and this pull to him, like, this must mean that I am so in love. No, not one bit.
Yeah.
Not one bit.
And that can be the same for any sort of relationship that's toxic. Like we see it a lot with other, addicts and people like in our area, like, but even with normal people,
Oh, yeah.
The behaviors are still.
I see it with everybody. Every type of person. It is probably one of the, like I said, it's an emotional addiction. It's probably one of the biggest addictions that I see, not even just in work, but in my personal life. Because we are people who are meant to connect with one another, but then we end up connecting on this level that is so parasitic.
Ooh, good word.
Thank you. Versus it being mutual respect and love. And so it took me a long time in my early adulthood to learn what authentic love was.
Right.
Because what I had enacted in past relationships was not that. It was complete toxicity built out of the fear of being abandoned and then therefore being alone. And I don't know if you can relate to this too of, the reason why we do a lot of things is because we try to make up for what we didn't get when we were younger. Like the I'm proud of you. So the way that I would try to have my parent give me attention was to do well. Like, be the best dancer, get the best grades, like achieve all these things. I still automatically do all of that today. So, because our egos will do anything that they can to keep us safe and protected in our comfort zone. That's always why we revert back to these old behaviors. And I know our writer had brought that up about being afraid of just reverting back to her maladaptive patterns. You have to expect that your ego is going to do that. So then you just have to continue, which we'll get into later, the work. Do the work.
The work.
Snap back. The work. What does that look like? But listen, we were taught that our parents were supposed to love us.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they maybe don't in the way that we needed them to, we take that to mean that they chose not to love us.
Right.
And then we decide then, oh, well, we're not lovable. And then we continue to enact that with especially partners,
Mm-hmm.
friends even, where we will choose people and get into relationships with people who cannot love us.
Right.
Which just then reinforces, going back to core beliefs, the core belief that I'm unlovable.
Yep.
And then we fuck ourselves every time. It's awful.
So let's talk about the one part where she was like, how she puts others' needs in front of hers in the please don't abandon me or hate me, and also I hate confrontation away. We touched on that, but what can we look for when we're dealing with a situation? Like, I for me, like, flags go up now. Like when I'm doing things, I'm like, what is my motive behind why I'm doing this?
Yeah.
Like, is it to like keep you in, this space that I want you to be, or like you said, like, am I betraying myself in acting this way? So, what do you think a good way to like? What are some flags to look for in behaviors of yourself or others?
So usually you'll start to notice, at least in my experience working with people, you may start to feel more drained, more exhausted, if you start to feel resentful, right? So when people lack of boundaries and you then like set all these expectations for the other person, you'll start to cop resentments because they're not doing what you expect them to. Again, that emotional hit in your stomach is your ego. That is not like, oh, I have butterflies and I'm in love. Like, no, your ego's getting fucking set off. If you find that you're really critical of yourself, right, and starting to beat yourself up in that negative self-talk, those are a lot of the red flags, so to speak, for yourself.
Right.
To start to notice of that. But authentic love, again, like, it is supposed to be safe. It is not meant to be draining. You should not feel exhausted. And so if you're feeling those things, you're feeling resentful with your partner, yes, that starts and ends with you, but that is not a safe and secure relationship. It is breeding codependency.
Right.
Boundaries are not a bad thing. Everyone like shudders when we talk about boundaries.
Boundaries are not a bad thing, but they're hard. Like, when you start to begin to set them, it's so uncomfortable.
So uncomfortable because you're not getting what you perceivably need
and
to
usually
stay comfortable.
The other person, I mean, unless like they're open to receiving the boundary, it's usually like an uncomfortable thing to do, to be like, hey, like, this is what I need from you. Like, most people don't respond well.
No, because it's so threatening.
And they take it
to them
personally.
Absolutely. But boundaries are a way to show other people how to engage with us.
Right.
Remember, other people are not mind readers. You have to tell them what you need and want.
Right.
Because their needs and wants might be different than yours.
Right.
Their perception is different than yours. Their past traumas are different. Or even if they're the same, they still can't read your mind that you want that dish washed. Don't ignore them for 3 days because they didn't fucking wash the dish. Tell them to clean it. And if they don't, because that's not what they do, well, then you just clean it.
Oh, my God.
It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
It feels like a big deal, though.
That's the thing. Yeah. It's funny because one of the podcasts we both like, they talked about that, like when you like live with a partner and you have certain expectations of like how they should like keep the space and how you do. And they said at the end of the day, like, if you want it done a certain way, you might just have to do it.
Yeah.
And that's not being like enabling or codependent. It's just like they live differently. And like that might like, because for me, like, in being codependent, I'll like set the boundary, and then when it isn't met, I'll still get resentful, and then like the dish will still be in the sink. So it's just like
who's winning here?
Yeah, like exactly.
Nobody.
funny.
Well, because we were not taught how to meet our own needs growing up and therefore looked to whether it was our parental figures or whoever it was to meet those needs, and then they for even didn't and could not, we depend on others in our adulthood to meet our own needs.
Right.
Again, one, not knowing what they are, thinking that they can read our minds, thinking that, well, if they did that, that means that they care about me.
Right.
It has nothing to do with that. They are just living from their past conditioned lived experiences.
Right.
They're what they were taught, what they've learned. We've said this before, what other people do truly has very little to do with us. And with people pleasing too, that's another way of that, right? So not saying something, trying to get them to read our mind or thinking that they will, being overly nice. All of that, by the way, I'm here to tell you, is a form of manipulation.
Manipulation,
So,
you
like,
say?
yeah. You're not being nice, you're being fucking manipulative by people pleasing. And whenever I tell people that, they usually
I feel
are
attacked.
Like, they're like, what?
I feel attacked.
Yeah, because you're being nice, so to speak, to try to be seen in a positive light by that other person.
Yep. Yep.
And then, in turn, neglecting your own needs and wants. Like, again,
So
who's winning here?
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody.
It's okay. I'm gonna use a word.
Yeah.
It's a journey.
Oh, you hate that
I
word.
know. In learning how to navigate that.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Because I'm conditioned that way.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the way that my brain has been wired to behave.
Mm-hmm.
So like to go against that and act differently has been uncomfortable. It becomes, now it's like I started, saying in the beginning of this year that this year why are you cringing? But this year,
Because I relate.
this year, I'm not only going to work on not being a people pleaser, but I'm going to speak my truth. Instead of just saying to myself, I'm not going to do this, or I'm going to say no. Like, if I, experience something and something makes me uncomfortable, I have to go out of my way to voice it because I'm so used to not that like I just shut down. So now like it's like I feel like I'm being a bitch a lot of the time just by setting like simple boundaries. But I know that I have to you have to continue to do it to make it a habit. Like I have to become in the habit of speaking up for myself and setting these boundaries so it becomes normal.
Absolutely. And, listen, that other person, may in fact think you're a bitch. That does not mean that you are, therefore, in fact, a bitch. That is their perception.
Right.
And we cannot live off of what other people may or may not be perceiving us as.
Yeah.
I said this in an earlier episode, we disappoint our own lives when living for other people. But what you're talking about it comes down to true anatomy again. So it's trying to be gentler with yourself and not put so much pressure on yourself of, oh God, like I'm like this inherently and this is just who I am and what's wrong with me. No, our nervous system genuinely becomes committed to certain types of people, certain behaviors, certain circumstances. So it's retraining your nervous system. It is reparenting yourself in teaching yourself how to stick up for yourself, how to speak up, how to set boundaries. Like you are becoming your own parent.
Right.
And I was cringing when you were talking about how uncomfortable it feels because it's not just uncomfortable. It's agonizing. I'm in agony when, in situations where like I might fall back into codependent patterns or fall back into patterns of betraying myself. And I will literally be in full awareness of what I'm doing and be feeling the agony at the same time and battling with myself of what do I do and what do I not do because I don't want to feel this pain anymore. But the validation that I might get from that other person or, that emotional hit we may get from being the people pleaser or, blurring your boundary, it is only temporary.
Right. And then it goes away and then you're stuck still with the agony.
Yeah. We are constantly looking for that temporary relief. And that's going back to, what we were saying or like about with whether it's with drugs, whether it's with food, and it also happens with other people.
Right.
And that temporary relief is never long lasting, ever. We can't try to keep changing things in our favor to try to feel comfortable. We have to change everything within ourselves in order to actually experience true safety and security within our own selves.
And that's like to go into where she talks about depending on others to validate her or comfort as a way to seek to stability and to feel like, you know, you have control no matter how illusory it was. Like that, like you said, like it's a form of manipulation. Like, but at the same time, you're manipulating yourself into thinking that this is healthy because you're like, this feels good, so it must be right.
It's not feeling good. It's learning that it is just the absence of the discomfort.
Right.
Because if you were to know, and when I say you, I just mean like anybody, if we were to know what true love felt like, we would know the difference. But because we haven't maybe allowed the space for that to be created yet or experienced that yet, like this is all that we know, and we mistake it for true love and connection. Our writer also sounds very critical of herself. And that's another sign of codependency too, like being critical of ourselves, being critical of others, totally out of fear.
Right.
Perfectionism, big one, to try and avoid being criticized.
Right.
It's all in a way for us to, again, stay safe and secure. And when I say safe and secure, I don't mean in the healthy way. I mean in the way that we've always known since we were younger.
Right.
And so everything we're doing is all in an effort to just stay there versus ever growing out of that, so to speak. Like perfectionism generally becomes a coping behavior.
Yeah.
I mean, I can at least say that for myself for sure. Do you also ever have you ever had the experience of feeling like you were responsible for other people's feelings? Do I know you?
Are you attacking me right now?
Maybe.
Yes.
This is what therapy is like with me.
This is awful.
Have you ever?
Yeah, I do it. I still do it, even knowing. Like I'll be able to say, like, I know that I'm not responsible for this person's feelings or their emotions or their emotional state. And then some part of me still feels connected to it. Like that I have something to do with it. So, like, I still haven't been, in certain relationships, haven't been able to, like, because, like, in my brain, I'm like, if I cut myself off from this, then I'm being, like, dismissive or cold. Like, if I can't separate the two, like, if I separate the two, I mean, like, then I'm, like, detaching from this person completely. Like, you know what I mean?
One thing I found to be really helpful with that exaggerated sense of responsibility that you discuss, because we're not that powerful. We are not powerful enough to make anybody feel anything. Cannot tell you how much people fight me on that.
Right.
But it's true. Like, we're not that powerful. Is to, like, what I do is I'll take myself out of the dynamic and go and talk myself through and do some breath work on, you know, identifying and validating my own feelings, and then taking myself through, you know, what the facts are. Like, of how, like, I'm not responsible. And so I'm creating the space for myself to be seen, heard, and understood, and then therefore I can come back and allow the other person to feel safe, seen, heard, and understood. And that can be helpful instead of trying to take responsibility of, oh my gosh, I'm powerful enough to have made you feel this way, by the simple fact of me needing to set a boundary.
Right.
Like, my boundary did not cause you to feel that way. Like, that feeling that you had is a response that is conditioned because you're feeling whatever, threatened, abandoned, etc. But if we allow each other to feel seen, heard, and understood in that way, rather than shutting each other off or, you know, putting each other down for how we might feel, telling each other person, like, that's crazy that you feel that way.
Well, I've had that experience.
Yeah.
Like, being told, like, that, you know, codependency is not real, or, you know, like, these are just, like, things that people who love each other do.
It's not.
Yeah.
Like, if you feel like, and this is what you were asking earlier too, like, if you feel like you're walking around on eggshells, you feel like you cannot identify your own feelings, you feel so disconnected from self, you know, and you are doing for others at the expense of your own well-being, I'm here to tell you that is not love. Love is not starving other people of your attention and then also taking that from somebody else. Love is, you know, not being able to function through conflict. love is not being able to set boundaries. Like, none of that
I
is
think
love.
I think it comes down to a lot like being able to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a big part of like what true love is. Like to be able to hear somebody even if you don't agree
Yeah.
and be like, "Okay, I hear you and I'm going to try to, incorporate this into the way that I interact with you."
And even asking them, how can I help you feel more seen and heard?
Right.
And allowing that space to be created to ask them and allow them to express that, or go figure that out and come back
Mhm.
and express that to you. Those are, and she talks about, her needs. Like, those are our basic needs, is looking at how I can be, seen, heard, and understood.
Mhm.
And that looks sometimes differently for everybody, but just instead of getting frustrated or threatened or offended because someone or your partner might feel something, how about asking them how maybe you can help them
Mhm.
and help them feel a little bit more safe and secure? Again, it's not your responsibility. You are not that powerful, but this is also a partnership.
Right. Yep.
You know?
It takes work and it only will work if both parties are invested in doing that work.
Mm-hmm. But instead, what I see a lot with people is they either partner, what ends up happening is you try to control or fix the other person, control their behaviors, change their personality, change who they are, change their conditions to fit into what you would feel most comfortable and safe with. Again, we are not powerful enough to change other people. And if you have to change the person that you're with, maybe you should consider not being with them. Anyway, it's just something to consider.
I mean, that's the honest truth of it. Like, and that goes for any relationship, not just, with a significant other. If you're doing this work and you've done all you can, and you've set these boundaries and like you're still, dealing with this, that like you have to have that honest conversation. Like, this person, like I'm still holding space for this person in my life. And it's causing me agony.
Agony. Like true agony. And what is that saying about our own reparenting, our own self-worth?
Right.
What is that saying about us getting our needs and wants met? Very little. And listen, we can have done a lot of work on ourselves and still fall back into these patterns. So it's something to remember. And I know she had brought up the writer had brought that up at the end.
Well, it's a constant thing you have to continue to work on.
It is. I know that she, talks about figuring out, what her decisions are, what her needs are, and like feeling okay, going in line with that. And then she also at the end asked us how she finds herself. What are some things that you found in your codependent journey that have worked for you to help you get to know yourself and heal from these patterns?
So a few things. And like I said, like this isn't something that like you do the work and it's like gone.
No. Yeah.
If you don't continue to look for these things and work on them, and I have to like sometimes do things against how I feel I should do them. Like I'll be like, well, like this feels dramatic, or like setting a boundary, and then I just have to do it anyway, no matter how uncomfortable I am. I've had to look at what behaviors and interactions that I've had have been problematic, like from my end. Like still, like okay, I've been working on this relationship with this person, but I'm still betraying myself. Like I'm still, tying myself to their emotions and like how they react. And like a lot of times it's hard for me to understand what a boundary is supposed to look like.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I know there needs to be a boundary, but I'm just like sometimes not sure what exactly it's supposed to be or how to follow through with it once you set it. So I have to like continually be looking at it, like you said, like, like, do I get that feeling in my gut? Is my stomach telling me like, oh, like I'm gonna go act this way because it feels good. Like, that's usually not the right thing to do if I'm trying to work on this.
You bring up two really good points, though, that one I want to
Mhm.
mention about when we feel badly for setting a boundary or
Guilty, like full-blown
yes,
guilt.
yes. So there is a difference again between empathy and codependency. So empathy can sometimes fall into
This is so tricky for me.
yeah. And this happens for me all the time. Like, I have a really, really, really hard time not seeing the inherent good in people, which is not a bad quality. But when I see the inherent good in people and know that they are inherently good, I'll still betray myself because I'm, forgetting that what they're still presenting to me is unhealthy and the interaction that we're having is still unhealthy, even though I know that deep down you are a good person. So always remember that there's a difference between being empathetic and then betraying yourself through that empathy.
It's so tough.
Yeah. And how I work on that is saying to myself, like, okay, like, you feel for this person, you know where they're coming from, you know the pain that they are in as to why they are doing this or treating you this way, or maybe even not realizing that they're treating you that way. But that doesn't mean that you then have to
Accept it.
Change anything, not set a boundary, take their shit anymore. And when you bring up about boundaries too, and yes, it is a learned practice to be able to set boundaries, but even just having the conversation with somebody out front of being like, hey, this is how I'm feeling. Like, when you do this, I feel
this way. Yeah.
By the way, this is effective communication. Yep. Like, when you, and like whatever the person did or said, I felt, and therefore I need X, Y, and Z. I know I need to set a boundary. I'm having a hard time figuring out what it is, but I need to let you know that this is at least what I'm feeling, what I need right now, until I can get there and figure out how to set that. We can be open and honest from the beginning.
Right.
Even in the beginning stages of our healing, we can be open and honest with our partner or our loved one and say, like, this is not okay for me, and I need to figure out how
we can adjust.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know. It's like so weird being open with people.
Trying to set boundaries with people that you're trying to help or be there for can be tricky. So what advice would you have regarding that?
So some questions I encourage you to ask yourself are, how much are you enabling versus helping? Are you stepping in to help them when they haven't asked you to? Are you sacrificing yourself or your time, your finances, your mental health in the interest of, quote, helping them?
Right.
Because a lot of times we think that we're helping people when in actuality we are people pleasing. We are trying to step in and do something for them to help maintain what we think their perception of us is. People pleasing is in actuality manipulative. You are manipulating the other person to have a improved or kind or good perception of who you are.
Right.
You are not pleasing anyone. You are manipulating them.
Surprise.
Yeah. What's the motive behind it too? Like, what is the motive behind you maybe dropping everything to help this person?
Right.
Providing them advice or, going and doing for them what they maybe can do for themselves. That's enabling, right? Like, you are enabling them to not learn from this experience and instead step in and be the superhero. Do they even want to be helped?
That's a big one.
Yeah. I mean, are they even asking you for this? And even if someone is asking you for help in some way, it doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice yourself in any way to be able to do that. If it is draining you, if you are giving away money, if you're losing sleep, if you are
wasting time,
not going to work, in no way or shape or form is that helping. You are sacrificing yourself. An example that I give to clients all the time is, in order for me to best help you, I have to take care of myself first. If I don't, what am I going to walk into sessions half asleep, my stomach growling, crying? Like, how is that helpful to anybody if I'm not taking care of myself in order to be of service to you?
Right.
So the difference between being of service is doing that because you can, because that person has asked you and you are actually able to step in and help them in what they're asking you to do. And it's not in any way muting you, betraying yourself, or sacrificing yourself, or enabling them.
Right.
And sometimes we have to love from afar. Like sometimes saying, no, I cannot do this for you is actually love because you are allowing that person to experience the consequence that they maybe need to experience in order to make the changes that maybe they need to make.
Right.
But who are we to stand in the way of any of that?
Mm-hmm. So what are some things to look for to be able to decipher these behaviors and being codependent or enabling, you know, when trying to help others or be there for others or work with others? Because I think that's the thing that can be difficult, is like knowing for yourself what a boundary should look like.
Mm-hmm. If you find that you're resenting the person,
it's relatable.
Sometimes even resenting yourself for doing the things that you're doing, for whether it's not setting a boundary or blurring a boundary. When you are feeling emotionally and mentally and sometimes even physically drained. So if you are feeling depleted or drained in any way, you are not acting out of love, you are acting out of fear.
Yeah, our bodies will tell us. We have to listen. Like a lot of times we don't listen when these things come up.
Yeah. When you consistently feel disappointed, so in helping this person, often what we do is we set expectations of then how they will react to our help, how they'll then maybe treat us in return. And usually they don't react in the way that we want them to or treat us in the way that we want them to. And we end up disappointed. So that's another telltale sign that you're acting out of, again, that codependency, like trying to receive that in return. Selfless help is not expecting anything in return. You are not sacrificing anything in any way to show up for this person. You are showing up out of complete love.
Right.
There's no expectation set. You are not wanting anything in return. You don't want them to think anything of you in return of that. And boundaries are different for everybody. Like, for instance, my boundaries look a lot different than a lot of my friends' boundaries. With, you know, I've learned that my phone has to go off at a certain time at night. I've learned that I can't listen to a lot of things from other people outside of my job. Like, I've learned that, you know, my needs have to come first in certain ways with when I'm eating meals and when my sleep patterns go. And, you know, I have to say no to a lot of things because I choose to have the job that I have. And so I've learned for myself what has helped me not be depleted, not be resentful, not be irritable, not be discontent. And so when you find that you're consistently feeling those ways, especially in your interactions with others, you are probably acting from a codependent place rather than a helpful one, or from a loving place.
Right.
So when setting boundaries, I always encourage people not to apologize for them because you're not doing anything wrong. What you're doing is you are making a choice in your own best interest. You are consciously choosing something different.
Right.
And this is part of reparenting. Even though the other person may not like it, which you have to expect that they won't, because it is going to be threatening to them because you're changing the dynamic. And that just is because of how dynamics work, not because the boundary you're choosing is wrong.
Right.
Or what you're doing is wrong. But consider this. So, like, if you feel like you're walking around on eggshells, well, what is happening within you that you need to change? And then what would that verbal and then therefore physical boundary to back up the verbal boundary look like?
Right.
I always say that when you're setting a verbal boundary, which is looks a lot like what we had said earlier, like when I feel, therefore I need. And if this need does not get met, then this is what's going to happen as a result of that. So AKA a consequence. And I don't mean that, you know, you're setting ultimatums with your partner. I mean, like, there's just going to be a consequence to that. And that's okay. But you want to just think about, okay, what would help me get my basic needs met, and how can I then verbalize that? And I always look at, like, basic needs, like, are you even getting what you need nutritionally, sleep-wise? Are you crying all of the time? Are you late to work? Are you betraying your schedule for this person? Are you canceling plans with other people for this person? Looking at just like your basic day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, how is it affecting your day?
And then how can I start to change that?
I
Yeah.
I just had like a flashback.
Oh, great. Let's talk about it.
Being late to work. I had this relationship years and years and years ago where, long story short, dude showed up at my work.
Ooh.
Yeah, like in a not friendly kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And like the cops had to be called.
Oh, good.
How fun.
Yeah.
But like that was like normal stuff that would happen in
Mm-hmm.
these relationships because it was all chaos. Like, and like I was not able to look at like, oh, it's this relationship that is like affecting my life.
Mm.
Other things too. Lots
Right.
of drugs and stuff, but
But like that's also a drug.
yeah.
Like codependency, toxicity in relationships feels like your drug addiction,
Yes.
alcoholism. Like
Yep.
it feels like that.
Yes.
In any of those situations I've ever been in, I feel like I am using drugs
Yes.
even when I am not.
Yes.
Relatable. But you brought up a great point. Like that felt normal to you because that was what was normal to you. I'm here to tell you that that's not normal.
No. And it took me a long time. And obviously, like, I had to get sober to even begin to, like, look at that because that's, like, I chased any sort of feeling of a high for so long.
Mm-hmm. So the other thing with boundaries, too, like knowing and, like, changing patterns, if you feel uncomfortable, that means you're doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
So if you feel uncomfortable setting the boundary, that means it's right for you.
Yeah.
Because what feels, quote, comfortable is not right for us. Like, it's what's keeping us
That's so
stuck.
key for me.
Yeah.
That's what, like, I have to go against what my gut sometimes tells me to do because my gut's telling me to be comfortable and don't make any changes.
When people talk about following their gut, that's that ego part that I was talking about. You want to focus more on how your heart feels.
Right.
Now, when we've never focused on that, you're like, what the fuck is she talking about? But you will feel your heart open when something is right for you, when something is in line with self-love and loving others. You will feel the drop in your stomach, the heat in your stomach, the turn in your stomach when it is not.
Yeah.
Even if you think that it is.
Yep.
We have to begin to view our emotional triggers as teachers. That's how you become aware of what the external triggers are that facilitate the emotional reaction within yourself that then facilitate you to go and betray yourself.
Wow.
So look at it as, okay, these are teachers, not things to run away from or suppress or be afraid of.
I'm feeling this way for a reason.
Yes. And looking at, like, when this person maybe triggers you, what trait in this person is activating me? Like, and it's the same thing we were talking about flipped, like when another person may feel a certain way because of a boundary we're setting, like flip that, like what's being activated in me based off of their reaction? Like, am I afraid of being alone, being abandoned, not being loved, not getting that validation, whatever it is. Love does not mean self-sacrifice. You should not be sacrificing yourself in any way to receive love for another person. So what's the opposite of that look like? And again, like, we may not know for sure what our needs are, but start with the very basics of that. Like, are we getting our basic physical, nutritional, health-wise needs met? And then go from there.
It's great.
Is it? The best thing to do for ourselves, too, is to practice self-compassion and non-judgment of our feelings. In, saying to ourselves, like, I accept this feeling. Like, I accept that I feel this way. I don't judge this feeling. And, like, this is okay.
Right. I'm allowed to feel this way.
You have to expect that you're going to fall back into maladaptive patterns. Like she asked at the end, like, you're going to have to expect that. And that's okay. But then you can continue to just move forward.
Right.
You can't expect to do this work and then just be cured forever. That is the number one thing I see the most when working with people is they get so frustrated with themselves when they've been doing work for a while. I go through this all the time. and then they fall back into an old pattern.
Right.
Nope, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Just learn to accept
it. Yeah, and learn from it.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about what authentic love
Ooh.
feels like is. I was saying earlier, it feels safe, right? And not safe in the way that is toxic. And our partner or the other person that we're in the relationship with is not viewed as property and is not viewed as somebody to control. That's really tough, especially when your codependent patterns are to try to fix, manage, and control another person's behaviors to fit into what would help you feel most secure, because you don't trust yourself to be able to handle what might happen if it were different. I'm just saying. And it's not an ego battle.
No.
Love is not an ego battle. Love should not feel like a emotional roller coaster. If it does, get off. And there should be peace and knowing that you're choosing one another, and you're choosing one another from a place of mutual respect and admiration. And it's rooted in self-knowing. And you and I have talked about how you can be self-aware and still not doing anything about it. But both partners are coming not just from a place of self-awareness, but from working on them themselves.
Right.
I don't think I just said words, but
them's own selves.
Them's own selves. Their selves? I don't know. Whatever I said. And then coming together, like what we were talking about earlier with allowing the other person and yourself to feel seen, heard, and understood.
Right. Yeah, I can relate to that. Because, like I explained, one of my past relationships was extremely codependent. I mean, like, probably all of them were until, the relationship I'm in now.
Yeah.
Like, in a real, like, sick way. But, with my significant other now, like, he communicates so well that it makes it really hard for me to not be able to, like, it's easy for me to communicate boundaries, or because I know that, even if he wasn't to respond in like a reasonable way, like he always comes back like I hear you, like I understand you, even if he doesn't agree. And then we can like talk it out in a way that's like mature. And there's been times when we'd be like having conversations and like I'm so emotional by nature. Like when I like set a boundary, I immediately almost cry like while doing it because like I'm so emotionally tied to like how you're going to react. And like I'll find myself almost like laughing during our conversations. Like I'm so silly in the way that I perceive things because of how I'm used to, people in my life responding. But like having the security of knowing that like I'm in this relationship, he is his own person, I'm my own person, and we can meet in the middle, and like there doesn't have to be chaos and arguments. Like we can communicate like adults, and when we disagree, or because we do have differences that we work on, that like when you live with somebody, it's just like we talked about before, like dishes and like small stuff like that, it can affect your day. But like if you're able to communicate them properly, then you don't get resentful.
Exactly. I mean, you have to assume that you're not going to agree with everyone. And hey, that's okay.
Yeah.
Like your partner, your friend, or whoever is allowed to disagree with you and it not be threatening.
Right.
It doesn't mean anything about you. It does not have to turn into this whole conflict.
Right.
Again, confrontation is not a negative thing. It is a way to connect more deeply. And the other thing that you bring up about how when you communicate with your partner, you would feel like you were going to either cry or you start to laugh, or that's just your younger self coming out. So just something to point out for us to be aware of.
Seriously, like I feel like a child.
Yes, your
like
inner
that fear comes up.
Yep. Your inner child is coming out, responding like, "Hello, I'm here." And that's what the work is you are reparenting our younger self who comes out in fear, discomfort, starts giggling, starts crying, who is seeking that little attention. Like, again, we throw temper tantrums like we're fucking 5-year-olds because of that, because our inner child is feeling threatened, is looking for that attention, is so wounded. And so we have to, instead of beating herself up more, criticizing her, putting her down, neglecting her, betraying her, we have to give her love.
Mm-hmm.
We have to let her be seen, heard, and understood instead of doing all the things that we do in order to try and receive love from somebody else, which, by the way, is not love. Codependency is not love. It is emotional addiction.
Ooh.
Love does not
Wait,
mean...
can you say that again?
Yes. Codependency is not love. It is emotional addiction.
There it is, folks.
Here it is. Love does not mean self-sacrifice. So we're done now, right?
No. No. I just wanted to sit on that for a moment.
Just to go over too, like how we can commit to ourselves.
Yeah, and figure how do we and also like figure like there's things I know to be true about myself, but I still feel like there's so much more to learn. Like there's obviously always so much more to learn about yourself. So how do you know who you are, quote unquote, or how do you find yourself, as the question states?
Yes. So it's actually not about finding ourselves, because that's what we've been doing all along. We've been trying to find ourselves in another person, in our careers, in something outside of ourselves, money, whatever it might be, drugs. So that doesn't work. That's why it's not working for our writer. Your true self is waiting for you. You have to go meet her. She's already within you. And so we're not trying to find her outside of ourselves. We have to meet her within ourselves. And that looks like sitting with ourselves and doing breath work and the dreaded meditation.
Journaling.
And the journaling. And just start with 3 minutes a day of the meditation. Just start with 3 minutes of the breath work. Part of committing to ourselves is by having a routine, is by keeping these small promises to ourselves.
Right.
And that's how you build trust in self. So what we're doing is we're creating this space to be able to meet your true self and get to know her and develop a relationship with her, rather than trying to find it, like I said, in something else or someone else outside of ourselves. And a couple other ways to commit to yourself too are holding your boundaries. Like that is being authentic.
Yep.
Holding boundaries.
Staying true to what you believe you need. Yep.
Protecting your energy. It is okay to say no to things. It is okay to...
I love that.
Yeah.
Because
I
never said no.
You were talking about this last time, being mindful of what you consume.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And learning our triggers. So I encourage our writer to spend some alone time with herself. The way, and I had touched on this briefly last time, the way that I became comfortable with being, quote, alone, which, by the way, I am not alone. I never will be. Regardless of whether someone else is on my couch with me or not, right? Or in my life or not. You genuinely sit with yourself and observe that inner monologue, observe those automatic thoughts. Those automatic thoughts are not who you are. They are, again, a product of your conditioned lived experiences. But get to know what's going on in your head and get to know what's going on in your heart. I always suggest inner child meditations. Like, genuinely connect to your inner child. You will cry. You will feel uncomfortable. It will feel incredibly painful. It's sad. But that is the part of us that is coming up screaming every time we enact in these toxic patterns with other people, instead of actually ever experiencing true love from ourselves or others. We just continue to sacrifice our own needs and our own wants to try and receive some sort of attention from someone else. And it never does anything.
No, it doesn't serve us anymore.
No, it never did. It never will. And what I had alluded to earlier, like setting these boundaries and healing ourselves, like some people are not going to get it.
Right.
People are going to push back. It's threatening to them. When you start to stick up for yourself, the other person now has to fucking do some work, or, you know, they have to
adjust.
Go do them themselves.
They have to pivot. Yeah. They're like, what?
Pivot.
They get thrown. Pivot. Pivot.
And some relationships might end. Like, I have had plenty of even friendships end in my life that have been so incredibly devastating, but because I changed.
Right.
And by doing that, you're creating the space for you to not just develop a relationship with yourself, but the space to be able to develop healthier relationships with other people. and again, if you feel any of the things that we were talking about earlier, like walking around on eggshells, depletion, exhaustion, you're drinking or on drugs, but you're really not. Criticizing yourself, critical of others,
obsessing,
not, you don't know how you feel, not being able to identify your feelings, not being able to express yourself fully. If any of these things are happening, you are not experiencing authentic love.
Right.
We are shifting who you are based on another person's perception to who you are based on who you actually are. And it's okay if it's like some weird, identity that like loves The Office and like wants to stay home on a Friday night.
It's fine.
And like, who cares? Like, it's who you are.
It's fine.
You're allowed
Stay
to like
true to that.
Yeah, you're allowed to like what you like. You're allowed to do what you do.
So do we have any final notes?
What do you think?
I think we covered a lot. I think
did.
that trying to, like, the main question of how to find yourself after years of being codependent, like, look for those red flags in your behaviors. Like, start small, like in trying to change small things about the way that you react or behave. And like, I think, they seem pretty aware that this is going on. So like, they might already, have started doing that. But also, like, be easy on yourself.
Yeah, we have to. We're not used to that. That's why we don't do it, but we have to start trying.
Yeah, don't beat yourself up. Like, this is a journey.
Whatever that means.
As they say. And
also, too, I want to caution that by you continuing to do these things aren't going to change. Like, the person's not all of a sudden going to decide one day, like, oh, wow, I love you. Or, oh, wow, like...
oh, wow, I hear you.
I hear you. Or, you know what, I'm ready to clean that fucking dish that's been in the sink for 3 weeks. It's not going to happen. Everything's going to stay the same because you're doing the same thing.
Right.
Over and over and over again. And
how about even if you do change and they stay the same, then you have to look at the relationship, right? I just answered my own question.
You did. And sometimes people find that they can move forward in that relationship because they've done the work.
And they adjust.
And it started, ended with themselves. But then sometimes you might find, hey, I don't deserve this. Or this is not what I need. Or this is not authentic love. I was in this relationship because I thought it was, but now I recognize that it was codependency. And usually when you start to do the work and have focused more on loving yourself and giving that authentic love to yourself, you can recognize that the relationship that you're in was not made of that.
Right.
And you usually don't want it anymore. A tip I want to leave you guys with today is the book Codependent No More by Melody Beattie. It's a great read. It's triggering.
You can order it on Amazon, I'm sure.
Yes, you can. You may not relate to all of the stories and all of the examples in the book. That is okay because you will relate overall, I'm sure. And there also is a workbook, but I suggest at least starting with the book itself. We hope that this has been helpful.
Yeah, this is great. I feel like it was very therapeutic for me.
Yeah, this is a very triggering topic.
It was. I feel a little drained.
Yeah, I feel drained prepping for this episode. I was like crying a lot. And that's okay.
It's great.
But remember, you are not unlovable until someone loves you. You are and always have been lovable since you got here.
Thanks for tuning in.
We love you.